7. The logic of playing dirty. For nothing can seem foul to those that win. Shakespeare, Henry IV, Part 1, Act V, Scene 1. Even the most strident defender of the competitive spirit is willing to grant that one can go too far. Everyone shakes his head at excessive, or inappropriate, competition, and the winning at all costs philosophy that fuels it. One manifestation of such excess is self-destructive behavior. There are those in business who wear themselves to a frazzle trying to get ahead, as if professional success could compensate them for having turned their private lives into a wasteland. There are those in school who think that subjecting themselves to a grim regimen of nicotine, caffeine, and no sleep is a small price to pay for another few points on the midterm exam. There are those in sports who devastate their bodies in search of a trophy, enduring hypothermia, hypoglycemia, and dehydration to the point of double vision and hallucinations. Never far behind this physical punishment is the psychological torment that waits to be unleashed on a loser. Most people who speak of competitive abuses, though, are thinking of how we break the rules in order to win. In athletics, this may take the form of point shaving, college recruiting scandals, performance drugs, all of which are quickly becoming as commonplace as 6- and 7-figure salaries for sports stars. The playing field is also where we find excessive violence, immobilizing one's opponent by playing dirty, for example. The competitive pressures behind winning ugly, as it is sometimes called, are hardly confined to the pros. One need only attend a little league game to witness a kind of institutionalized child abuse. It would be a mistake, however, to restrict a discussion of cheating to athletics. A news dispatch from the 1985 meeting of the American Association for the Advancement of Science began as follows. Medical leaders and journal editors agreed today that highly competitive pressures in modern science were provoking cases of outright fraud and an even wider range of white lies and deceptions that they said were eroding the integrity of science. Dr. Robert G. Petersdorf, Vice Chancellor for Health Sciences at the University of California at San Diego, said, "The competition to win academic promotions and federal research grants was causing an undetermined number of scientists to exaggerate or cheat in reporting research they had done. Consider also the wide range of unethical and sometimes illegal behaviors in political campaigns, smearing opponents, accepting and laundering illicit contributions, tapping phones, stealing documents, forging letters, and burying all of this under an avalanche of lies. The point of Watergate, remember, was to win a contest. Then there are the bribes and sabotage that have come to be seen as a routine part of doing business, the selective use of evidence, and the 100 other dirty tricks that are common practice among lawyers. The way the truth is stretched for effect when journalists compete for space and recognition, the fact that pre-medical students sometimes ruin each other's experiments. Pick your field. If people are competing, many of them are going outside of the boundaries that have been established to delimit acceptable ways to win. There are accepted and remarkably uniform ways of dealing with competitive abuses. Responding to rule breakers is itself governed by rules. If you are a conservative, you will make sure that each wrongdoer is punished individually. The severity of the punishment will vary. When medical researcher John Darcy faked electrocardiogram data in 1981, he was stripped of his right to practice medicine in New York. When the Bank of Boston engaged in what was widely called a money laundering scheme, it was fined the equivalent of about 1 day's after-tax profits. Regardless of how stiff the penalty, the point is that each person who goes too far in an effort to beat out the competition is investigated and disciplined as if he were the only person who had ever done such a thing and as if he had acted out of sheer perversity. Liberal, reform-minded people are less interested in punishing than in exhorting competitors to obey the rules and avoid getting carried away with the race to win. They are fond of unearthing an example of exceptional sportsmanship. A college coach who refuses to pay his athletes under the table, a tennis player who walks off the court arm in arm with her opponent, and they hold up this model to others. Competitors are told that the only thing that matters is how the game is played, that abuses can be eliminated if they would only make more sportsmanlike gestures, such as shaking hands or helping an opponent to his feet, or eliminate all authoritarian people from coaching, or replace the term opponent with associate. Thomas Tutko and William Bruns urge us. Let's compete, let's play to win, but let's keep it all in perspective. To learn to compete and face a challenge, to learn to accept victory and adjust to defeat, is quite different from a philosophy whereby one individual or team must emerge as a victor. Of course, they failed to explain how it is possible to compete in such a way that one individual or team does not emerge as a victor. Underlying both approaches, isolating and punishing an individual who cheats and cautioning competitors about going overboard, is a single assumption. The assumption is that the ugly measures people use to get ahead represent a contamination of true competition. Thus, sports writer John Underwood says that cheating, defile, competition, has perverted the good name of sport. That violence for William Bennett, now the U.S. Secretary of Education, violence is a degradation of the game. While for Garrett Hardin, bloodiness is only an accident of competition. This is also the position of James Michener, who declared the problem is not with competition per se but with the violence that excessive competition arouses. The conservatives' insistence that the fault lies with the individual competitors and the liberals' careful condemnation of inappropriate competition are really not so far apart. In both cases, competition itself is rescued from any blame. If we get rid of the troublemakers, if we don't go too far in our quest for victory, then there is nothing intrinsically wrong with the win/lose structure. If you were an advocate of competition, this is precisely the tack you would take. No matter how frequently they seem to appear, you would argue that abusive, self-destructive, violent, or immoral behaviors are corruptions of real competition, which is in its essence as virtuous and healthy as these exceptions are nasty and neurotic. To argue in this way is also to enjoy an appreciable rhetorical advantage, since such a position appears pleasingly moderate. You are not saying all competition is bad, but merely that it should not be done to excess. What could be more reasonable? This position coincides with the entrenched reluctance of Americans to consider structural explanations for problems. We prefer to hold individuals responsible for whatever happens or, at the most, to find a convenient proximate cause. Rarely are events understood in their historical or economic or social context. As one of many possible examples of this, consider how we respond when our children fail to learn. Typically, we insist that they are not studying hard enough, or else we put the problem down to poor teaching. What we do not do is acknowledge that a two-tiered educational system funnels most of the promising teachers and the privileged children to the private sector, virtually guaranteeing that students without the resources to follow will receive an inferior education. We do not ask why learning is defined in terms of a standardized test score, why obedience is valued above critical thinking, and we certainly do not look at the institutions in our country whose existence depends on a passive, acceptant public of precisely the sort that our schools manufacture. The story is much the same when we confront poverty, or crime, or most other social ills. As for psychological problems, we do not even recognize them to be social in nature. The trouble is framed as an illness, purely an individual matter. This way of looking at the world has several consequences. It often results in blaming the victim, as many observers have pointed out. It leaves the foundations of our society undisturbed and even unexamined. And it all but assures that the problem itself will not go away. In the case of competition, the root cause of abuses is the competitive structure itself. Abuses, then, is really something of a misnomer, since these actions do not represent the contamination of competition but rather its logical conclusion. In the last chapter, I argued that hostility is virtually built into an arrangement where someone else's fate is inversely related to your own. So it is that a structural imperative to beat others invites the use of any means available. The aim of competition is to win, and the temptation is to win at any cost, wrote Arthur Combs. Although it begins with the laudable aim of encouraging production, competition quickly breaks down to a struggle to win at any price. This process is part of the natural trajectory of competition itself. The only distinction that a competitor qua competitor knows is that between winning and losing. Other distinctions, such as between moral and immoral, are foreign to the enterprise and must be, as it were, imported. They do not belong. The only goal that a competitor, again, qua competitor, has is victory. The only good is what contributes to this goal. If a new goal is introduced, particularly one that interferes with winning, such as staying within the guidelines of appropriate conduct, it is likely to be pushed aside. This does not mean that people who do so don't understand how to compete. On the contrary, they understand perfectly. Their behavior follows from the structure. What this means is that we can no longer content ourselves with simply condemning cheaters or feeling sorry for self-destructive competitors. To do so is not only short-sighted but hypocritical. We set up a structure where the goal is victory and then blame people when they follow through. Pious admonitions about not getting carried away in competition, however well-meaning, are just exercises in self-deception. If we are serious about eliminating ugliness, we will have to eliminate the competitive structure that breeds the ugliness. This perspective is radical and disturbing, but I think it fits the facts, that is, the frequency and pervasiveness of improper actions during competitive encounters, far better than the contamination view. Most people do not even keep the facts in view, failing to see the connections between campaign illegalities, scientific fraud, corporate trickery, and the use of steroids in college sports. Each appears in a different section of the newspaper, and it never dawns on us that there is a pattern. Once we acknowledge that these diverse shady activities all take place in the context of competition, we are more likely to see that the problem lies with the common denominator. A few writers have identified competition itself as the problem. And Strick's critique of the American legal system, as we have already seen, questions the premise that justice is best served by an adversarial, i.e., competitive, model. She goes on to argue that this model is largely responsible for the abuses so common in the profession. The Watergate lawyers were only doing what came naturally, Strick writes, because enemies is what our legal system is all about. The need to beat the other side in the courtroom is the basis of diversion, distortion, and direct deceit. Where polarity shapes thinking and winning is the orthodoxy to which men chiefly adhere, deceit is absolutely justifiable. Gunther Lushan realized that the same is true on the playing field. By and large, the characteristic of a contest as a zero-sum game seems to explain why cheating should go on at all levels, even where the odds at stake are not high. By definition, all competition is zero-sum, in the broad sense of mutually exclusive goal attainment, so the invitation to cheat is always present. George Orwell made the point even more strongly. Serious sport has nothing to do with fair play. He wrote, "It is bound up with hatred, jealousy, boastfulness, disregard of all rules, and sadistic pleasure in witnessing violence." Empirical research lends credence to this view. A sports psychologist found that both athletes and non-athletes use lower-level egocentric moral reasoning when thinking about dilemmas in sport than when addressing moral issues in other contexts. These and other findings suggest that moral norms which prescribe equal consideration of all people are often suspended during competition in favor of a more egocentric moral perspective. These findings also suggest that competition itself is responsible for the development of a lower moral standard. Indeed, another pair of researchers point to evidence that regular sport participants become more committed to winning at any cost and less committed to values of fairness and justice as their competitive experience increases. Ironically, Michael Novak, whom we already know to be a staunch defender of competition, agrees that sports naturally lead participants to try to win at any cost. The true practice of sport goes on, beneath the moralistic mythology of virtue and clean living. Basketball without deception could not survive. Football without aggression, holding, slugging, and other violations, only a few of which the referees actually will censure, could not be played. Baseball without cunning, trickery, and pressing for advantage would scarcely be a contest. Our sports are lively with the sense of evil. Sports provide an almost deliberate exercise in pushing the psyche to cheat and take advantage, to be ruthless, cruel, deceitful, vengeful, and aggressive. However appalling one might find Novak's cheerful endorsement of these attributes, he is accurately reporting that they form the basis of sport, that they issue from the contest's very nature. It remains only to emphasize once again that they are not confined to sports. They are to be found, albeit in different forms, in virtually any kind of competitive activity, and for that matter throughout a culture defined by a competitive worldview. Bertrand Russell put it well, the trouble does not lie simply with the individual, nor can a single individual prevent it in his own isolated case. The trouble arises from the generally received philosophy of life, according to which life is a contest, a competition, in which respect is to be accorded to the victor. This view leads to an undue cultivation of the will at the expense of the senses and the intellect. What, then, of sportsmanship and other calls to stay within certain guidelines? First, the notion is partly cosmetic. It offers a patina of respectability for the enterprise of making other people lose. The social pressures associated with the latter are far more powerful, and our sanctimonious noises about being a good sport allow us to condemn rule breakers when it suits our purposes. More important is the fact that sportsmanship is an artificial concept. It would not exist except for competition. Only within the framework of trying to win is it meaningful to talk about carrying this out in a graceful or virtuous fashion. If we did not compete, we would not have to try to curb the effects of competition by invoking sportsmanship. We might well be working with other people in the first place. Even viewed in this light, though, the question of sportsmanship reminds us that not every businessperson resorts to sleazy tactics to get ahead, and not every football player tries to disable his opponent. There are plenty of factors that encourage or discourage the use of inappropriate techniques. One such factor is the level of the competitor's moral development. Not surprisingly, researchers have found that the maturity of an athlete's moral reasoning is inversely proportional to the number of aggressive acts he or she engages in or views as legitimate. Other factors include the severity of the penalty, the likelihood that violators will be caught, and the perceived willingness of other participants to abide by the rules. The implication is that it is possible to try to counteract the natural consequence of the imperative to win, and thus reduce the level of intentional competition. It is possible, but we Americans generally do not do so. On the contrary, the trouble with a hyper-competitive culture like ours is that we not only leave the mechanism intact but we create a network of reinforcements for winning at any cost. Cheating and the like can be said to be overdetermined, called forth by both the intrinsic structure of competition and the societal attitude toward it. The latter has been remarked on more frequently than the former. In her analysis of lying, Cicely Bach writes, "The very stress on individualism, on competition, on achieving material success which so marks our society also generates intense pressures to cut corners. To win an election, to increase one's income, to outsell competitors, such motives impel many to participate in forms of duplicity they might otherwise resist. The more widespread they judge these practices to be, the stronger will be the pressures to join, even compete, in deviousness." The last sentence is crucial. The pressure we feel to be number one creates a vicious circle as we expect others to play dirty, and feel justified in breaking the rules ourselves, if not obligated to do so. If I play it straight, the next guy is just going to take advantage of me. To complain, as the lawbreaker often does, that honesty does not pay may be self-serving, but it is largely correct in a competitive society. When we dismiss someone as a loser, one of our most scathing epithets, we are underscoring the importance of winning. It is not seen as important that we win with restraint, or in accordance with ethical principles, just that we win. An athlete who plays dirty develops a reputation as someone to be reckoned with, someone impressive and fearsome. He is bad or tough, in the admiring sense that children use these words. The concrete advantages of such a style also are clear. What's a 15-yard penalty if you can put the other team's receiver out for the game? No one gets kept on the team for being a good sport. The more substantial penalties are handed out for losing. Moreover, as Tutko and Bruns observe, the American culture has built so much guilt into losing that the person who tries to make a healthy adjustment to it, like cracking jokes in the midst of a losing streak, is thought to be a lousy competitor, if not a little crazy. Clearly, it is better to be thought overzealous than a lousy competitor. The pressure to win at all costs, again, is not limited to athletics. Unethical campaign practices are partly the result of our society's priorities. As sociologist Amitai Etzioni explained, truth to be told, the Watergate gang is but an extreme manifestation of a much deeper and more encompassing American malaise, the emphasis on success and frequent disregard for the nature of the means it takes to achieve it. Not only high-level administration officials, but many Americans as well, seem to have accepted the late football coach Vince Lombardi's motto. Winning is not the most important thing, it's the only thing. Thus, the executives of ITT who sought to overthrow the government of Chile to protect their goodies, the mafia chieftains who push heroin, the recording company executives who bribe their records onto the top 40 list, and the citizens who shrug off corruption in the local town hall as, "That's the way the cookie crumbles," all share the same unwholesome attitude. True, the Watergate boys have broken all known American precedents in their violation of fair play, but they are unique chiefly in the magnitude of their crime, not in the basic orientation that underlies it. The tendency to shrug off political corruption as expected and unexceptional is not only distressing but very dangerous, rather like the refusal to differentiate among health hazards on the grounds that everything is bad for you. The effect is that politicians know that the reaction to their improprieties, if discovered, probably will not outweigh the fruits of victory. By the same token, the lawyer who resorts to gutter tactics is well aware that his or her win/loss record is what really matters. Marvin Frankel put it this way: in a system that so values winning and deplores losing, where lawyers are trained to fight for, not to judge their clients, where we learn as advocates not to know inconvenient things, moral elegance is not to be expected. Such social pressures, I want to reiterate, merely reinforce the inherent qualities of competition. Our approval of winning at all costs is the secondary inducement to cheat. The primary inducement is the nature of competition itself. It is true that contests without cheating or violence can occur if we successfully introduce considerations that are external to the impetus to win. Such contests seem unobjectionable, however, precisely because the element of competition has been diluted. To point to a morally exemplary lawsuit or an examination where the honors system is respected is not to refute the basic point here. The less competitive a given activity, the less likelihood, all things being equal, of abuses. This is consistent with the arguments offered in earlier chapters of this book. The higher the concentration of competition in any interaction, the less likely it is to be enjoyable, and the more likely it is to be destructive to our self-esteem, our relationships, our standards of fairness.
I wish I could say everything's just peachy, that life is easy, but you and I know it's not. They got everyone thinking that's just how it is, so no one asks if the system could stop a culture built on cutthroat games, where winning means someone else takes the blame. But the truth they hide is we've got all we need to lift each other up and let the world breathe. Don't let them pull the wool over your eyes. You know there's something wrong with this picture. We draw our power from the spirit of the times. Zeitgeist, zeitgeist, zeitgeist. Wouldn't it be something if no one had to fight? just to have a warm bed or a meal each night. We could build a world with dignity and grace, a future worth leaving for the human race. My generation's got fire in our veins. All we need is a spark to ignite real change. We'll rise from the ashes and find hope again, fueled by truth and a vision with no end. Don't let them hold the wool over your eyes. You know there's something wrong with this picture. We draw our power from the spirit of the times. Zeitgeist, zeitgeist, zeitgeist. When the power of love overcomes the love of power, the world will know peace, and that is the hour. We shift from fear to collective might and turn on the future's guiding light. This is the dawning of a brave new dawn, where all under the sun can be transformed. When it's all said and done, love will conquer war and silence the hunger we can't ignore. Don't let them pull the wall over your eyes. You know there's something wrong with this picture. We draw our power from the spirit of the times. Zeitgeist, zeitgeist. Learn more at thevenusproject.com.
According to estimates, over 1 billion people live in appalling levels of poverty. Denied even basic standards of food, water. Nearly half of the world's population earns less than